Now I'm going to start looking at, let's move this over here so you can see what I'm doing. Let's start talking about gapping the rails. Now I'm going to need to do a little bit more prep work here. I need to add another tie here because I found, and you know, it depends on what your what kind of skill level you acquire, but there's some diagrams out there that only have just one PC tie that holds the ends of the gaps up. I like to have two. Just because if I'm a little bit slow in cutting the rail, this will heat the rail up, this will break the soldering joint if I just have one here, and these rails will pop out. And I don't want that, so that's why I have two here. So in other words, if you're going to gap the rail, two on one side, two on the other. That's my rule of thumb. That works better for me. Maybe if you're developed the skill to cut a little bit faster than I do, then you could probably just have one on either side, but I always put two as a rule of thumb. So I didn't have enough PC ties in there, so I'm going to add one more. I'm also going to add one more right here to secure this section of rails right there. So I'm just going to add a couple more. Okay, and then we will move on to gapping the rails. So let me get ahead and do that and duck out for a second and get back to you when I have these soldered. Okay, I've got PC ties soldered in place here. Now we're going to move on to gapping the rail. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a gap here, just right there, and I'm going to cut a gap right here. Now you don't want to gap your rails too close to the frog, or what you'll end up with, what I've ended up with, is that there'll be a little bit of play in the truck and the wheel set of the train as it goes by, and it may accidentally cause a short out because the gaps are too close to the frog. If it has a little bit of play here, I've had that happen where I thought, okay, let me cut this as close to the frog as I possibly can, and I ended up cutting the tree limb out from under me and having shorts as the drivetrain of the engines went over it. So, yeah, about right here, you want to make sure and that you leave enough space between the rails so you don't have problems with the trains going through the frog. And I've been using the dead frog method. You can, electrically power the frog when you have it isolated. I mean, you can do anything you want with this when you have it built, but I just go with the dead frog method. And if you don't know what I mean by the dead frog method, in other words, you leave the frog completely electrically unpowered. And the idea behind is that if you have an engine going over it, basically your drivetrain is going to be longer than the dead frog itself. That's part of the theory. And secondly, you have the second drivetrain and back supplying power to the whole train, so it doesn't matter whether there's power supplied to that, your engine will go through. And I found that to be true. I mean, it depends on the length of the engine too. I mean, if you run older diesels, like the Jeeps, you may run into problems. I have mostly Burlington Northern 70 Max and Dash 8s and stuff like that, so those don't have any problem. And in addition, I've never tested any of these turnouts with steam engines, so I'm assuming they would negotiate these frogs and these turnouts fine. But I've never messed around with it, so yeah, I'm assuming it would work for, a 70 Mac. It would work for a Mikado or a Big Boy or a Challenger, but like I say, I don't do steam, so I can't say how well these turnouts work with that. So that's something that you may have to play around with. Okay, back to gapping the rails. Other preparations I need to make is to make sure these rails are soldered into place. So I've put some these little soldering discs down on there already. I'm going to touch my soldering iron, make sure these are soldered in place. Go ahead and do that. Alright, got that there. And okay, I think we're good to go. What I use to get my rails is a Dremel motor tool with a cutoff disc. And whenever you do this, you need to have some kind of protective eyewear on, and make sure there's no kids or animals in the vicinity, because these discs are fragile.